Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
We take from the thousands of business books out there and test the author's ideas by comparing them to real-world challenges. With over 40 years of projects between us, we've got quite a bit to compare against. We give you the condensed takeaways, followed by our review with the authors.
We know you want actions, not theories, and it's actions that we want to help shape, because that's what the Wicked Podcast is all about, helping you to become a wicked company.
So, Marcus, get in the Wayback Machine. The Wayback Machine, and think, when did we meet? Where did we actually first meet?
I thought the first time I ever saw you, and I think we didn't talk much at that point, was at that pitch meeting over in the Innovation Warehouse. You were just there one day. I just saw you. I think you came in late. You were late. And you just came in there and you were very confident, a bit different too, a bit younger than the rest of the old guys with money. But and I think I just got your name and that was it. And I think then the next time around, we might have met there again. I think it was something around either maybe I looked something up around you or whatever, and you were just about working for that startup. And so I interviewed you about blockchain for my book. I think that was the proper second time in the cafe around St. Paul's when I was working on a PT project. Yeah.
But it was that initial connection. And then it was working between us to kind of build and grow that connection to where now we're doing a podcast together. So on that basis, who are we talking to today?
So yes, connections. So we're talking to Michelle Tillis Lederman and her book, The Connector's Advantage. She's written, this is her fourth book, she said, correct me if I'm wrong. And it's all about how we connect, how to build good connections and the value and strategies and tips and tricks and how to do that better.
And with good connections, you can achieve results better, faster, easier. So really, really concise kind of value proposition.
Exactly. So what were your actions, your proposed actions out of the conversation in the book?
Right. So what am I going to tell people that they should be doing tomorrow in an organization? She talked about how important connections are within an organization, even more so now that people are working from home, remote working. So create those virtual water cooler moments, create those opportunities for serendipity within your organization, and keep those relationships strong, whether you've got them or whether you don't. The other thing she talked about is she's got two different frameworks, one for asking and one for deciding if you're going to say yes or no to different requests. I think it's really, really important that in an organization, you practice asking for what you need and use the framework, the easy opt-out. Yes, if you've got enough time, don't be afraid to say no, and this is what I'd like you to do. And then the ability to decide yes or no and have a framework worked out on when you're going to say yes and when you're not. So I think those two things are virtual water cooler, keep the relationship strong, and in an organization, practice both saying, yes, I need help, and yes or no, I'm willing to offer it.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's great on especially the internal things. So I'm gonna go a bit external, and I think I'm gonna be able to tie it back to wicked problems. So the whole idea of understanding and listening and looking at the context and understanding the context goes into hearing as many different kind of views and voices as possible. And you can only do that if you start connecting, right? And you connect outside of your bubble. You connect outside of your silo. You connect outside of what you think might be the obvious people to talk to or the hierarchical obvious people to talk to. And I can say that often enough to getting out there and bringing those voices in has been statistically proven to be of really, really high value. You de-risk when you do that. You understanding a problem more holistically. And in particular, to give you some examples I did in organizations is when I was working in the advertising industry, I saw a lot of creative teams sitting in their glass boxes, coming up with ideas, watching YouTube, and in order to get into subject matter. And I said, what are you doing? So I dragged them out there into shops, onto the main street, and go, have a look where people buy, have a look what they're doing, why, and to understand how they're even shopping, right? What are you doing in your box out there? And it doesn't cost a penny to step out of the office. So I did these kind of things, and that brought different viewpoints and different contexts that You don't understand until you're feeling it, until you're really in the field, right? So that was one thing. Or to go and then talk to people out there in the shop and say, I'm sorry, this and this and this and that. And it's always lovely. The other thing is, I remember just Tom Peters saying he doesn't respect anyone who doesn't go into a cab and not having a chat with the cab driver. He doesn't respect people like that. It's like every time he does it, and I'm bad at impersonating his voice here, but he was like really, really, really passionate about it, and it makes perfect sense. It's like you're gonna get a good variety that's likely outside of your usual kind of remit to just. It's the easiest chat you can have in a day if you jump into a cab. The other part also that I found when I was working in particular at the PT project was when we went out and building new service design teams, doing customer research. Not only did we ask different questions, but we started to really ask different people that were never asked before in that organization, the question we would ask them. And people were so grateful. So it's even a positive experience. And the teams loved it, right? Teams who'd never done this before and thought, I don't know, and were a bit careful about it. Like, get into this comfort zone, because actually the payout is amazing. You're going to connect the people across the organization. You'll understand them better. They'll be happy that you actually ask about how their work is, how their life is sometimes. And it really, really helps, And the other thing she as well mentioned, or I asked around as well, is like it's now becoming such a amazing, statistically proven skill set for anyone to have, because we're going to more likely have cross-disciplinary teams. We're going to more likely have to deal with wicked complex problems and needs that we have to fulfill on the customer side in order to create value. Developing the skills of a connector is great for everyone in any job. Google's been proving that those types of soft skills make the best teams. They create the best innovation. So it's an amazing value. So I would say, do that tomorrow inside your organization when you're dealing with customers. The more different kind of voices, the more you can step out of your bubble. And as you said, on social media, we're starting to diminish it. Step out, listen to someone else, and meet someone else. And I think it's a great book because of that. And I think those are just some of the simple actions anyone can do. It doesn't cost a penny.
Really, really good insights. The last thing she said was, make a list and reach out and just make a random connection, just say hello to 3 or 4 people. So that's on my task list for tomorrow. And on that note, Marcus, what should we do?
Let's go to the interview. Hello, everyone. Today we have Michelle Tillis Lederman with us. Hello, Michelle. How are you doing? And thank you for being here.
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show.
So we normally start at the top with always same question, which goes to you as well, which is, please tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wrote the book.
I always find that challenging question of, just tell me about yourself. I'm like, well, I'm an adrenaline junkie. I love to travel. I love animals. I'm a mom of 2. And I know that's not usually what people mean, but I actually think that those are the important things to share, because that's where connection forms. And that's really what I'm all about, is connection. I am a recovering CPA. I spent 10 years in finance. I started my own business. I think we're going on 15, 16 something years at this point. And I am on a mission to help people communicate to connect.
Lovely. And you are not just the author of one book, but many books. So, and your last one, tell us a little bit more about what made that manifest into reality.
I've written 4 books. My first was called The 11 Laws of Likability, and my latest, The Connector's Advantage, actually is the follow-up to that book. And in between, I wrote these books, and I really wanted to write The Connector's Advantage, but I had to finish off these other books first, because I promised some people those books. So it was almost my reward to be able to get this message out. And my brother-in-law walked into my office one day as I was finishing up The Connector's Advantage, and he said, well, what's the difference between networking and connecting? And I looked at him and I said, networking is something you do. A connector is who you are. And then I said, oh my God, thank you. That's the last line of my book.
Yes.
Brilliant.
I love those little serendipity moments when it just kind of falls out. It's great.
Yeah. And so when I wrote the first book, it was really about what to do before, during, and after a conversation to enable connection. And it really, the publishers were like, you have to use the word networking in the title. And I did, but I'm like, I hate networking. Networking has the word work in it. And who wants to do something that has the word work in it? And I don't want you to feel like you're doing something. I want you to kind of approach life and interactions and people and work and everything that you do with a prioritization on relationships. And that's what a connector does. They put relationships first.
Mm-hmm. So when you have a look at that, and given all the range of amazing examples you give in the book, and having written so many books around this area of subject matter, so what when people read the books, or when people approach you, or the people you work with, your clients or CEOs, what do they normally ask you most as a question regarding it? What sort of comes out where you go, that's sort of the most valuable or appropriate question
Now,
to ask when you go
Marcus, we did get a bit of feedback on that particular question. It might have been suggested that we skip it.
Did we?
Yes.
Oh, did we?
So why do we could have edit? We'll edit that question out.
Yeah, we can easily do that, right?
I'm sure that the reason is that I get so many different questions, so I'm happy to field it if you'd like.
Well, tell us an interesting question. Maybe it's not the most common question. Tell us the most interesting question a CEO has asked you.
Oh, it's hard to say, just one question.
Okay.
And I think that was my challenge with that question in general. But, questions I'm asked a lot are typically around how to drive perceptions. When we are forming relationships, we have insecurities about how we're being perceived. And one of the things that when I'm working internally in organizations is often around how to drive how people are seeing you and receiving you. And so that is part of your communication. It's being able to bring your authentic self. It is how to embody some of these mindsets of connection without putting relationship at risk.
Okay. That's a really good kind of summary. And we've got another question that we'll come back to about this whole idea of perception. But going kind of back to the question list that we sent you in advance was, you've already got a really nice section in the book about how do you maintain relationships remotely. And I would guess, was that written kind of before COVID?
It was written before COVID.
Right. But it was a really, really pertinent sort of thing and really relevant now. And I think it's interesting to me to ask, do you think it's harder to build and maintain connections? With part B of the question, do you think the people who had good connections going into all of our kind of remote working and COVID and lockdown have had an easier time of it than those who haven't?
I think it's a really interesting observation. And yes, I do. I think people who had already built connections, this time actually gave them the reason to reach out. One of the things people struggle with is, I have no reason to reach out. And I always say, you don't necessarily need a reason, right? You can just say, hey, you just came to my mind, I was thinking about you, how's it going? I send emails like that all the time. But now with the pandemic, you have an excuse globally to reach out to every single person that you're connected to just say, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? Right. And to kind of re-establish that connection, to strengthen the roots of that connection. And if you have connections, then you're golden, because this is a time where people are welcoming that reach out. Right. And I mean, I haven't seen my college friends and my business school friends this much since I was in those schools, because we're meeting online, we're having game nights, and we're going into the backyards and putting blankets around ourselves so we can be outside in the cold and still stay connected. So yes, but the former part of that is, how do we deal with staying connected when we're in these remote locations, and how do you start to build them? And that's a harder challenge, because we don't have the water cooler or the live events or the serendipity. So we have to be a little bit more intentional, which is something I've always kind of shied away from. I've always said, just find the person online at the playground or in the supermarket. And I've met people at the dog park and at the nail salon. So finding those natural forms of connection. Those aren't happening now. So we do have to be intentional. We are going to these online events, and hopefully they're doing breakout rooms, and hopefully you're putting those names down, and then you follow up with them, and then you try to get a phone call, and you have to, go through a lot more steps to try to start to build that connection, but it's still real possible.
One of the conferences that I attended was a phone conference, of course. It was all Zoom. But they said with people over a certain age, and we won't talk about age, right? We're not going to talk about age. People over a certain age are more likely to shield and more likely to stay in because the potential impacts are much greater, whereas the younger people are still out there, out and about doing things. And they said serendipity will become the joy of the young. And that trying to find serendipity moments when we are working from home, locked away, is indeed much harder. So I think that lines up really well.
Yeah.
Over to you, Marcus. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and especially those that are somewhere in between who have kids who are also schooling from home, and hoping we're not going to hear them jumping over my head. There's just so many requirements on and demands of you at this point that there's just no excess time or energy.
And what do you say to people? So I used to be more introvert than I am now, but I know a lot of people who are quite, and those, for them, there is a tendency that it's even harder to go and network, even in a, let's say, normal situation. And now you're sitting there and by yourself in a room on a laptop and you're trying to figure out what steps to take, or people who just have a hard time asking anyone for something for all sorts of reasons, because it's sometimes really hard for people to ask for help, for example. And I've been talking to quite a few friends of mine, and you could start to see, over the month, sort of the mental levels to a little bit break down, and people just everything gets a little bit harder. So I can imagine for introverts where it's easier to remove yourself from something rather to engage with something, it's at least twice as hard. So do you have any particular ways to maybe mind hack that for people who have those tendencies, and what do you normally say to them?
Absolutely. And there's two things that you brought up. One is the introvert angle, and the other was how to ask for something, which we can circle back to.
Yeah.
I actually always say that introverts have a bit of an edge when it comes to connection, because introverts actually are better in the one-on-one. I've had a lot of introverts tell me, this is great, I'm loving this, this isn't bothering me at all. And it's true, there's a drain for the extroverted energy that we don't have that outside input that drives us. So our energy source has disappeared. But yes, it might be easier for extroverts to reach out, whereas the introverts, they feel energized because they have so much of that quiet energy that they can pull from, so that they might be able to pull from that energy to do some of this reach out. And what I will tell introverts is, understand your skills that you naturally bring to the table. You are better listeners. You're better at the one-on-one. You are not off-putting. You are somebody who is curious and asks good probing questions. So bring those strengths, and guess what? You don't have to navigate a big crowd. You get to pick one or two people, and it doesn't have to be every day. It could be one or two people every week. You can go online, spend 5 minutes, pick a person on LinkedIn, send a personalized note, and you're like, I'm done for the day. And so if you do a little bit of that every day or every week, and then wait for those follow-ups, as people start to accept them, then you send a little note and say, here's why I reached out, and looking to keep connected to people in the industry during this shutdown time. Are you open for a phone call, right, or a Zoom?
Yeah, so it's really interesting when you talk about the energy of introvert, because that probably explains everything why this podcast probably exists, because it's nearly a one-to-one. That's really lovely. So when we look at that, I think it's something that came from Troy. But Troy, you want to go into the pick your brain?
Well, I want to give her an opportunity to come back and reach back to or follow up to it's difficult to ask. I've been through various stages in my life, and asking for help is not something I do very easily. I've gotten better at it, and I've gotten better at receiving. And I think for me, I had a really good kind of career coach for a while. He said the first thing you've got to do is be okay receiving, and then it gets better at asking. But give us your take on how do you get better at asking?
Well, Well, I'll tell you a secret. It's hard for me too. And that's why there's a whole chapter in the book dedicated to it. So one of the things that we talk about are the mindsets of a connector. There's 7 mindsets. And one of those mindsets is have a clear vision. That the only way to get the connector's advantage, which is faster, easier, better results, right? Whatever it is you're working on, you're going to get there faster, easier, and better through connection. But if you don't have a clear vision of what you're trying to accomplish, how are you going to accomplish it? So the first thing is getting really clear on what it is you're working on. And maybe it's you're working on promoting your podcast. Maybe I'm working on getting reviews for my book or selling books or whatever it might be. And when you have that clarity, when you're in a conversation with somebody, connectors will always infuse a question around how they can help, right? So they'll say something like, what are you working on? Or who would you like to connect with? Or how can I help you right now? Or, what do you need? You also need to have an answer to that question. So expect that question to be posed to you, and it doesn't have to be big. I once said, I want to meet Michelle Obama. I will tell you, by putting it out there, I spoke on the phone to her chief of staff when she was in office.
Right.
Wow.
I got to speak directly to her, but I got damn close.
Yes.
And I got my Heroes Get Hired book in front of her because we had a veteran program. So you have to put it out there. You have to have that clarity. Now, you also need to be able to ask in a way that doesn't put the relationship at risk. And I kind of list through about 4 or 5 different ways that you can make an ask. And I'll just give you one example. My favorite, and I use it all the time, is called the opt-out ask. And this makes it as easy for somebody to say no as it is for them to say yes. Because no is hard and yes is easy. And if I have to say no, and now I feel bad and I want to avoid you, and that puts the relationship at risk. But if you make it okay to say no, then I'm like, oh, phew, we're cool. And I might get a yes down the road. So when you ask, you give them the reason to say no. So I might say something like, if your company allows, I would really welcome a recommendation on LinkedIn. Company doesn't allow it. Oh, well, don't worry about it.
Right.
Or if you have the time to post a review on Amazon. And so I give them the out.
Yeah. And I think that's only one of the strategies, and we won't reveal them all because we do want people to read your book, but it was a really, really good section. But it does lead me nicely onto my next kind of pet peeve. Oh, Troy, have you got, half an hour for a coffee for a dinner? I really want to pick your brain. I'm like, picking my brain isn't free. There's a whole lot of decent stuff surrounded by a whole bunch of garbage, but there's a whole lot of decent stuff in there. And picking my brain isn't free. Now, it turns out that the better the connection, the better the relationship, the more established, it is indeed a quid pro quo, give and take. But when a complete stranger or a very early connection says, can I pick your brain? How do I say no properly? Because one of my favorite sayings before you say that, if you never say no, your yes doesn't mean as much.
Oh, that's an interesting saying. There's so many places I want to take this.
Go for it.
And bring me back to the quid pro quo because I want to address that, but that's a side note. So one of the other mindsets that I talk about is conscientiousness. Connectors do what they say they're going to do. They follow up, they follow through. As a result, they need to be really clear on what they're willing to say yes to and what they want to say no to. But there's different ways to say yes and to say no. And I usually think that they're not one-word answers. Yes if, yes after, yes when, yes with, yes for. Or no but. The no but is great. And so, for example, I'm asked all the time to do pro bono talks. And I do believe in giving back. That is absolutely, the generous spirit is another one of the mindsets. But I also have 2 kids to go through college. So we have to balance that. And so I have a certain number of slots per year that I give to pro bono.
Right.
And there's certain requirements, right? So it has to be an organization that either I believe in or, there has to be some requirements of the organization. There has to be a certain number of people that are in the audience. It has to be within a certain distance of my home. So there's certain things that I'm like, well, let's see if you meet these criteria. And so when you establish boundaries, when you establish clear criteria, it makes it a lot easier for you to say yes or no. And when you have to say no, you can say no, but if you can get a larger audience, no, but if you want to do a book purchase, no, but if you want to do a minimum payment guarantee, or, here's other ways to get to a yes. But without one of those ways, it's a no.
Right. And did your cousin like showing up in your book?
I'm not sure she knows.
Oh, right. Okay, fine. So moving swiftly on, back to quid pro quo. You said let's come back to quid pro quo.
So when you talked about, can I pick your brain? Like you, I struggle with this because having a generous spirit, you want to give. I don't believe in a quid pro quo. I do
Okay,
in
fair.
in a giving and a generous spirit, and give because you can, give because you want to, and give without expectation of something in return. That said, you need to have your boundaries. So I have in the past, and this has evolved over the years as my demands and requests have increased. In the past it was like I'll give anybody an hour. Then it became I'll give anybody a half hour, and then I'm now probably around 15 minutes to most people.
Right.
But I have to say no more because I had a time where I didn't even get a lunch break. My assistant had every 15 minutes blocked, and I'm like, I can't breathe.
Mm.
So what I do now is, I invite people to ask the questions, and then I will point them towards the resources that are already online. So I'll say, here's my blog, here's my YouTube channel, here's a quick response, go here for more.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If they're looking for coaching, a lot of times I will get on the phone and talk them out of it.
Okay.
Because I don't think everybody understands how to best leverage coaching, and that coaching is not, at least with me, an inexpensive endeavor. So I'd rather give you 15 or even 30 minutes of my time for free, help you in some small way, create a positive mood memory and association with me, and save you money. And maybe somewhere down the road in 5 years, you might be working at a company, remember me, and bring me in to do corporate coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And that has happened. I actually was looking today, I was doing my Thanksgiving gifts to some of my clients, and I looked at my second largest client from 2020, which was not a great year. And I looked back and I had met her when she was an audience member at one of my talks in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
7 years ago. She didn't hire me for at least 3, 4, 5 years that we stayed in touch. Because I liked her, because we connected, we maintained a relationship. When she had a question, I would get on the phone, I would give her free advice often.
Mm-hmm.
And she may never have hired me. This one happened to. I have other people that have never hired me, but maybe they referred me. Or maybe they just say nice things about me behind my back, and I'm okay with that too.
I made a connection in 1999 with a guy who just last year hired me. I met him initially in Indianapolis, Indiana. We worked together in California. I'm now working for him and he's in Hong Kong. But again, made that initial connection, kept in touch over the years, didn't have any idea and any expectation that anything would happen. And all at once, the planets lined up. And I love when those things happen.
There you go.
So let me a little bit for the next question shift this a bit into organizations themselves, because I remember in one of our first episodes we had Tom Peters on, who talked a lot about people first and about I think is managing through walking about, basically talking to lots of people and just connecting within organizations, and that being sort of a value that's often not really used. And given that in any given job that we have a lot of things to do, but beyond the original scope, there's always the benefit of knowing a bit more about the people you work with or the people in your organization or partners and so on and so on. So the whole idea of connecting there seems to be a really great value that's often really not encouraged maybe by companies, often because of silos and departments. But it seems to be a big benefit in the way to create better companies. So do you have any thoughts on that, connecting within organizations?
It is a huge benefit. Actually, the statistics show that the number one driver of engagement is the belief that management has an interest in their people, and they demonstrate that interest in their people. And when you have high engagement, you have higher productivity, and you outperform other companies with low engagement by over 200%.
Wow.
So there's statistics that back all of this up. So creating connected cultures in organizations is actually a financial decision, not just a morale decision, not just a retention decision, which are also financial, but there's loyalty, turnover, engagement, productivity, all of those things because of connection. There's a study that gives 12 questions to engagement. And one of those questions is, do you have a best friend at work?
Yeah.
Because you're happier at work and you are more productive when you have close work relationships.
I
So
almost always have a work wife.
my actual husband is probably also my work husband, but I don't think he wants to be. But so the key is, how do we create connected cultures? And I actually think the pandemic is going to contribute really positively on this front, because what we're seeing is organizations being getting that window into their employees' lives. We're seeing the dog tails and the cat tails and the kids popping in and those moments of chaos. And what it is allowing ourselves, we always say, bring your whole self to work. It's one camp. And another camp is, this is work, that is personal, those two shall not cross. And those are our perspectives and preferences. But now they're just smashing into each other. And I think empathy in the workplace has increased. I think that connectedness, that shift in what's acceptable, and and we've become more relatable. So I love all of that. And I think some companies are even being intentional about it. My husband's organization, they had, kind of put in little games and, questions at the beginning of meetings. He actually invited his whole team out to our backyard for an in-person gathering during this. And everyone put their masks on, and I took a picture and they put it in the company town hall, like, hey, look what teams are doing, So I think because we all feel so disconnected, organizations are a place where we're finding that connection, and hopefully it will last.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see because, we're really, obviously COVID has, as you said, smashed a lot of things together that were quite separated and often artificially so. And it also reminds me, because having a background both in service design and agile, we use a lot of icebreakers when we do workshop and so things, as you often in workshops do, but also in projects when you build new teams. And the whole idea of that is obviously to very quickly build a connection that is a bit more of value, so you get to know someone in 5 or 10 minutes. And you do games like I want to go up there in pairs and basically find 3 things that you have in common, however flimsy they are, and it's hilarious and it's funny and it's personal, and it just makes the room very quickly create a very different culture. And so do you see through that these things sort of improving? Is that sort of, because companies started to talk a lot about culture, especially the whole beanbag WeWork kind of culture that talks seemingly more about aesthetics than actually people to some extent. But do you see that really changing? Or if you say it's such a big value, is there something companies can do in order to maybe measure it better, or is this something you've been proposed before or have dealt with?
I love the question of measurement. And I think a lot of companies do engagement surveys and things like that. I think there's a lot of different things that can work, and there's not one approach, right? Whether it's surveys, whether it's focus groups, whether it's having these team building activities, it's facilitated conversations around what do you believe our core values are, or revisiting those mission vision statements annually or every few years, because especially with companies that are doing acquisitions and are growing, those core values get a little dissipated and disconnected. So I do think that there's a lot of things that can be done organizationally. I do worry that once we're back in person, we're going to forget about some of them.
Yeah.
But I think, companies can instill programs like mentor programs or buddy programs. I remember when I had my first job at Arthur Andersen, it doesn't exist anymore, but back in my finance days, I was actually assigned a buddy. I'm still friends with her to this day.
That's cool.
Right? It was the person who was supposed to be the person I could ask those stupid questions to, and she was only 1 or 2 years ahead of me, and it was safe. We were also assigned mentors. They were much further ahead. They were more about our career path, but they were putting these relationships in place for us.
Mm. Really, really interesting. When I looked at Nokia, there were reverse mentors. So some of the senior VPs were being mentored by some of the people that were closer to the coalface, down in the organization, to make sure that they were connected closer to what was going on with the company. And again, building those relationships, which are all about trust. There's a huge bit in your book about trust, and I absolutely believe that trust is one of those key foundations to connections and growth and establishment kind of over time. I'm going to shift. We're running out of time. We always have more questions than we have time for. And this is an awkward question to ask, because typically I like to keep things kind of upbeat and light, but this one's not so much. Social media has really started driving a wedge and polarizing people. And a lot of people are reading either social media or mainstream media or whatever they want, and they're outsourcing their critical thinking. And this boils down to two of your concepts. One of people like themselves, the law of similarity, and the other one is the law of perception, and perception being reality. And I think there's so much media coming at people that their perception is indeed impacted, if not twisted. And then the more division you get, the more tribalism you get. It's the law of similarity taken to extremes. So how do you work in the middle?
I remember when I was in 6th grade and we had to write a paper on, do you think the United States is a melting pot or a tossed salad? And the thing back then was, it's a melting pot. And my response is, it's a tossed salad.
Yeah.
You can see all those individual different pieces of fruits and vegetables and croutons and nuts. They're in the same space, but they're all individual.
Right.
And sometimes
I love that.
The nuts fall at the bottom and they're all at the bottom. And, so we tend to go, as you say, in our little groups. I don't think it's changed. I actually do think it's gotten worse. And so here's what I would say: make a conscious choice to diversify your connections, to be a more inclusive connector, and to broaden your thinking, because for so many reasons. But if you want to be more influential, if you want to be listened to, if you want to be deemed credible and trustworthy, and if you want to be viewed as innovative, increasing your connections, likability, and diversification of your connections will give you all of those things. Because when you are seen as likable, your ideas are received in a way that people will then play off of them and morph them. And you have a collaboration. And you're then credited with this great morphed idea that you just started, because people are willing to hear it from you. So innovation is really driven by connection and being able to connect people to thoughts and ideas, and to bring in those diverse thinking. I do a program called Communicating with Diverse Personalities. And it's understanding what each of those personalities, those thinking styles, brings to a project and to a conversation. And that sometimes when you don't have the voice of one of those styles, there's something going to be lost in that project. So I made a point during the election of listening to, I would say, at least half a dozen different news stations, just to see what everyone is hearing and to challenge my own thinking, so that I'm not just always on the same station every day. And I would challenge us to do that. We do tend to be friends with people who think similarly to us. And, I see this with my children. I try to say, hey, nobody's all good, nobody's all bad. And I'll never forget back in 2016's election, when the debate moderator said, say one nice thing about your opponent. I think it's a fabulous question, because nobody is all good or all bad.
Yeah, very true. Listen, we're going to wind up the show here, unfortunately. I mean, you've written not one book, but 4 individual books. And in the show notes, we'll put all the contact information and links to where people can go and get these books. Got to ask, are you working on another one?
I am not.
Okay.
I am not. I am busy writing the blog, so I have a blog, and so there's constantly thought out there. And I have a YouTube channel that I put some videos out pretty frequently. So the content's still being poured out, but those books are hard work.
Well, Marcus knows all about that. Marcus, any last words before we wrap up?
Yeah, so thank you so much for your time and insights. And just to as a little note or comment on the last insight you gave us, I think it resonates with me, not just from a connecting thing and being an ex-introvert, just getting a bit more energy back from this in those times. So for me, that conversation was great to start with, and so is the book. But also, like, it reminded me a lot on really looking at Google's Project Aristotle to look at the best performing teams and all these kind of soft skills that make the teams best. And one of them is definitely to, be able to listen to all the voices on the table and get a variety of voices on the table. And that obviously easily fuels into, get to know as diverse a group of people as because you never know where the good stuff comes from, or you never know where the different angle comes from that you didn't know. If I've been working in lots of projects, we never know where the pivots are coming from, right? And so I think this works on so many levels. It's so valuable. It was really great talking to you, and it was very, very inspiring, and just popped up a lot of different connections for me. And I think I'll have to make a new list per day to get in contact with more people, I'm sure. So thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you for your time and being with us.
Thanks for having me on. And if any of your listeners want to connect with me, I know all the stuff will be in the show notes, but I also have always some free gifts. And I have a quiz if people want to figure out what level connector they are. And I also give away a free chapter of books and a video series and checklists and things like that. So we'll put all that in the show notes, but you can always find me at my website, which is michelletillislederman.com.
Thank
Lovely.
you so
Okay, I'll be
much.
there. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.